Welcome, scientists and science enthusiasts, to our webinar series titled Women in Biotech, brought to you by Community of Biotechnology, a nonprofit organization founded in 2017. Today's event is all about celebrating women and inspiring women in commemoration of International Women's Day. Our guest speakers for today are bold changemakers who, with their hard work and dedication, have proven that gender does not have to define your roles in society, but your actions do. Our first guest for today was Senjuti Saha, but due to scheduling conflict, she was not able to make it today. She sends her heartfelt apology and hopes everyone will have a good time in today's event. But fear not, for we have two other incredible women as guest speakers. They will be introduced to you by our host, and please feel free to write down your questions and comments in the comment section below. At the very end, your questions will be addressed. I will like to give the floor to Zaratha.
Welcome to the International Women's Day webinar series with Women in Biotech by the Community of Biotechnology. I'm Zaratha, an intern at COB. Today I'm going to host a very special guest here. We have Dr. Nicole Wagner. She is the Chief Executive Officer of Lambda Vision. She's the founder of Lambda Vision, which was selected as the first cohort for the ABCT Accelerator program. Her research interests include the use of site-directed and site-specific saturation mutagenesis and directed evolution, through which she was able to genetically engineer the protein bacteriorhodopsin for an array of device applications, which include protein-based holographic and three-dimensional memories, a chemical detection sensor, and most recently, a protein-based artificial retina. It's an absolute honor to host you in this event. We will be looking forward to some helpful insight from a brilliant mind in this field. The floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Zaratha. I'm honored to be here today and happy to tell you a little bit about my journey. So, as you mentioned, I am the president and CEO of Lambda Vision, which is a University of Connecticut spin-off company that was founded to develop a protein-based artificial retina to treat patients that are blinded by end-stage retinal degenerative diseases. So some of the most common is macular degeneration, though we will be targeting the orphan indication of retinitis pigmentosa first. The technology was actually founded out of some of my graduate thesis work in Dr. Robert Burge's laboratory at the University of Connecticut. So when I was in Dr. Burge's lab, I was a graduate student studying molecular biology. And I worked on optimizing the light-activated protein that we use, bacteriorhodopsin, for a number of different device architectures. So I worked on holography, chemical sensors, photovoltaics, and then it was really with the emergence of optogenetics, which I like to think is sort of a fancy buzzword for using light-activated proteins to restore neural function, that we started to think about ways that the protein could be applied for the artificial retina use. So for me, my background, as I mentioned, I had a bit of a non-traditional path. And so I could talk all about the company, but I think you guys can read a little bit about that online. What I want to just talk about today is, my path to where I am and, how you guys just keep staying motivated, right? I mean, this is the journey is long, but hard work certainly does pay off. So my background, I often get asked, did you know you were going to be a scientist? Did you know this is what you were going to be doing when I was in high school and as a younger student? And the answer to that is no. I had no idea that fast forward, 20 years from high school that I would be here today. When I started off, I initially wanted to go to medical school because, I was certainly understood science, but I didn't know what a scientist did. I didn't know, I knew what a nurse did. I knew what a teacher did. But when you said you're a scientist, I was kind of thinking, okay, what are these people doing in the lab? What is it that they are working towards? So it was natural for me to initially start off as, moving towards medicine. I went to Florida State it was 2003. And I spent 1 year there in my graduate school, or my undergrad rather. And then I transferred to the University of Connecticut. And so when I went to research in Bob Burge's lab, the only reason that I did research was to check a box on a medical school application that said I did research. I knew it was good if you want to go to medical school to get involved in research. And so this was my opportunity to do that. So I started doing research in Bob's lab. And what I really realized at that time is that this was so much more than just research, and the experience was really incredible. We were doing cutting edge research to help uh, potential patients that are blinded by end stage retinal degenerative diseases, and we were also doing really exciting research on bioelectronics and biosensors. And so, I was very passionate about it. So when it came time for me to decide whether I was going to go to medical school or I was going to stay and do a career in research, my research advisor said, Nicole, why don't you consider staying at UConn and doing a PhD? So that's exactly what I tried to do. I applied to a PhD program at UConn, and my very first year I didn't get in. So I was a little bit bummed, certainly bummed, but I was motivated to still pursue a PhD. So I took sort of a bridge year and I took some classes, and I needed to take a physical chemistry class, which is a lot of math and is not my strongest point. But I did take some differential equations and I took some physical chemistry classes. And eventually the following year got into the PhD program. And that's when I started my research in Bob's lab. So now I'm in a research program, I'm in a PhD program, and the next question that usually comes up is, well, then how do you start a company? So I again had no idea how to start a company. At this point, I'm a scientist. I don't know what it's like to be in business. I don't know the language of business. But what I can tell you is that when you're in a business degree, or not even in a business degree, but as you're learning it, a lot of what it takes to build a business and to move forward is learning the language, learning how to communicate with people. And so the language of business is a little different than the language of science. But once you learn that language, it's very easy to communicate. So, for example, when I first had my first investor meeting, someone said to me, "Well, Nicole, is your technology, is it a 510K? Is it a PMA? Is it a BLA?" And I was like, "What are those words?" But those are regulatory paths. And so once I understood all of the acronyms, I understood that the path forward, and now we know our track to get our technology into the clinic. So I learned the language of business. We founded the company in 2009. I graduated in 2013, and that was my first opportunity to learn how to, first opportunity really to take the technology that we developed in our research laboratories and then bring it out and form this company. And we separated ourselves from the university. We moved into an incubator facility, and really it was a good experience for me because when you're in a research lab, you have the support and sort of the crutch of your research advisor and all those people around you. This was an opportunity for me to really set off on my own and think about how we can take this company out and really move it forward. So now we're in an incubator facility. I've been running the company at that facility since about 2013, 2015 is really when we started to get set up there. And then, for me, it's how do you take a company and learn all of those pieces to get it moving forward? So how do you know how to do the accounting? How do you know how to do the science? How do you know how to do all the legal things? And so my advice is to certainly interact with as many smart people as you can, right? Bring in as many experts, bring in legal, bring in, surround yourself with really, really smart people that can help you move your technology forward. So really the last piece, so I see we have probably I have about 10 minutes, five more minutes I want to talk about is, my transition from the artificial retina to some of the work that we're doing with NASA right now. So something that I think a lot about, and I would advise everybody who's watching this is, and it's probably one of my biggest pieces of advice is just show up, right? Show up, work hard, get yourself out there, be as meet as many people as possible. So for me, we were part of Mass Challenge in 2016. And Mass Challenge is an accelerator program in Boston. And so while I was in Mass Challenge, one of the sponsors is CASIS, which is the Center for Advancement of Science in Space, and Boeing. And so they sponsor this project to go to the International Space Station. And Lambda Vision was one of the recipients of the awards in 2016. So our goal in that particular experiment was to think about ways that microgravity could help support the development of our technology. So the way that we manufacture the artificial retina right now is through a process called layer by layer deposition. So essentially what we do is we take a small scaffold, and then we deposit protein onto that scaffold multiple times. So that's the layer by layer part. So we move it from one solution to another solution to another solution, and we build up the number of layers of protein onto that scaffold. Well, that process is very much subject to the effects of gravity. So things like sedimentation of the solutions, things like evaporation, things like convection, all play a role in how that deposition occurs. In a microgravity environment, you remove the effects of gravity, you have a much more homogeneous solution, you don't have evaporation issues. And so the hypothesis was that we'd have a much more stable thin film. So we flew on the International Space Station. We won the award. We flew to the ISS in 2018, which was incredible. We were able to watch the actual launch at the Kennedy Space Center, which was super, super cool. And, fast forward, we're able to conduct several other experiments on the ISS. So we've flown an additional 3 times since that first flight. So 4 times total to the International Space Station, and have been able to secure approximately $6 million in funding from NASA to continue development of that work. And so we did that work alongside our implementation partner, Space Tango. So what Space Tango does is they are the interface really from where we are to the ISS. So a lot of people ask, how do you develop an experiment on the International Space Station? How do you talk? How do you communicate? Well, what Space Tango does is they have a locker on the International Space Station, and we put our experiment into their box, which gets hooked up to their locker, which is really like a power unit. And that runs our experiments, and they control a lot of, the automation and everything from the ground. So working with them allowed us to get to the International Space Station. And what we do is we focus a lot on what we're really experts in, which is the protein, the manufacturing process, the parameterization, and facilitate a lot of that. So that's where we are today. We have been doing quite a bit of work on the ISS over the past several months. We're actually going to be flying to the International Space Station again in April. So we're very, very excited about that. And in addition to that, we are still working on the development of the artificial retina and some of the preclinical studies that are necessary to demonstrate that the effectiveness of the technology in animals, which is going to be essential for us to get to clinical trials as well. So with that, I will turn it back over to you. And I know that there's a Q&A at the end, so I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone has after hearing this story.
Thank you so much for your helpful insight and your valuable time. We're thankful that you didn't choose medical science and you came over to this industry, and we got an amazing mind to lead us through. And we're very excited for your next International Space Station journey. We hope that you get incredible amounts of results from there. So I would like to move to Rabia. Rabia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Zaratha, for giving me the floor. And thanks everyone for staying with us. Hope all of you are enjoying the event. And again, welcome to our event Women in Biotech. I'm Rabia Fatimi, intern of International Relations at Community of Biotechnology. Today we have with us our honorable guest, Dr. Maria Elena Bottazz. I will be hosting this session. Dr. Maria Elena Bottazz, currently Associate Dean of the National School of Tropical Medicine at Baylor College of Medicine, as well as Distinguished Professor of Biology at Baylor University, Waco, Texas. She is editor-in-chief of Springer's current tropical medicine reports. Dr. Bottazz is an internationally recognized with more than 20 years of experience and global health advocate for neglected tropical disease and emerging diseases of pandemic and biodefense importance. She has received prestigious national and international honors, published over 150 scientific publications, and participated at over 250 conferences throughout the world as a global thought leader. In August 2020, Forbes Lightem selected Dr. Bottazz as one of the 100 most powerful women in Central America. She led the team that gave the world the Corbavax, a novel low-cost COVID vaccine that could help greatly speed up the fight against COVID and reduce the number of lives lost worldwide. And because of this tremendous contribution, she is nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize 2022. Thank you so much, ma'am, for giving us your valuable time. We are all waiting for your enlightening speech. Before that, the audience are requested to comment below as we have Q&A session. So, without further delay, I'd like to hand over the floor to Dr. Maria Elena Bottazz. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Rabea. Thank you so much. It's just been a pleasure to participate. Starting today, you guys are launching all the events that we need to celebrate Women International Day, starting tomorrow, of course. And Community Biotechnology is such a wonderful organization, and a pleasure also to follow Nicole. You are a rock star, superstar, and we're all, really very eager to see how your discoveries really can be transformational. So it's a pleasure to share this podium with you. And I have to say, very similar to you, Nicole, I also, when you're a little girl and you, of course, like the sciences, I, of course, always was attracted to all the biomedical sciences in school, right? Science, biology, chemistry. And you always think, I want to be a doctor. And then you get surprised, right? Surprised how me the same way. I went to the University of Honduras, and because I graduated from an American school, I graduated during the summer, but in Honduras, the cycle of medical school starts, in January. So I figured, I'm not going to sit around 6 months. So I went to the university and said, okay, what can I do to start, learning while I wait for me to register and enroll in med school? And I stumbled in microbiology. I stumbled in a career that in Honduras is called microbiology and clinical chemistry. And I got absolutely fascinated because of a couple of reasons. One, of course, microbiology is the study of microbes. And they're fascinating, right, to study them in general, because there's so many. There's of course, the bacteria, viruses. I was actually very attracted to what we call the parasitic worms, the intestinal worms, that many children around the world and even adults are afflicted. And then the second reason is because even though you study the microbes, you study them in context of their host. So, this argument of, how can microbes really survive within the different species, and by host, not necessarily only human host, but also veterinary, animal, plants, any host. And then I realized that in Honduras, there were two major, maybe three major lines of how you can study the microbes and the interaction between the host and the pathogen. You could, of course, be a traditional microbiologist where you do, you run a laboratory, diagnostic laboratory, like when you go to, get yourself, your blood work, and then the doctors, of course, utilize your results, to influence and determine, diagnosis or treatment. The second is that, at least in Honduras, so I was raised in Honduras, microbiologists are also the public health officials, those who are out in the field, those who really interact with the people, to understand not only where are the pathogens, but the burden and the geographic distribution, and at some level doing a little bit of outbreak investigation, and so it was very, very linked to epidemiology. But the third line was global health biotechnology, to enable new discoveries, because many of these, parasitic, microbiological diseases sometimes are, very well known for many years, but there's no good ways to detect them, no good ways to prevent them, no good ways to treat them. And especially when we started seeing many of these, what we call emerging or re-emerging pathogens, that because of many other factors like climate change, of course, conflict, urbanization, globalization, deforestation, we started seeing how, not only the pathogens and the host, move, but also the vectors, right? Where, how we can get transmission of these diseases. So I think, similar to Nicole, I ended up ending into into liking research. One of my first mentors at undergraduate level taught me this line of global health technology development, and I did a thesis to try to develop a diagnostic tool for a disease called cysticercosis, specifically for neurocysticercosis. And then I got the opportunity of going to the United States. I went to get my PhD at the University of Florida. And then I did a couple of postdocs, one at University of Pennsylvania, the other one at University of Miami, but all aligned with trying to understand better this underpinnings of the diseases and the interaction with the human host, for then to enable discovery that could lead into new drug targets, new vaccine targets, or new diagnostic targets. And I think my aha moment came from the fact that, behind the scenes, I come from a family of entrepreneurs, a family of business. Nobody in my family, is really have the scientific mind like I did when I was little. And when I was in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania, there was I really wanted to figure out if I could, increase my capabilities by diversifying a little bit my knowledge. And I was always interested in business, always interested in strategic management. More and more in research, as you know, we work in teams. So you have to understand not only how you build those teams, how the organizational behavior of those teams, how do you find funding, right? So the finances, how do you market, the work that you do? Because at the end of the day, you have to have a lot of these skills. And similar to Nicole, I had to learn a different language, right? A business language. How do you transition a technology from the basic laboratory into eventually a regulatory enabling and a critical path that eventually leads into a product. In my case, of course, a little vaccine vial. And how do you produce it? How do you scale it? How do you market it? How do you go through the regulatory pathway? And that's where I decided to, at the beginning, a little bit as a hobby, to go to business school and get into a program of strategic management. And I noticed that many of my professors in the Philadelphia area came from the pharmaceutical sector. So I think that was my aha moment, where I learned that, knowing the hard skills of science and technology and biotechnology, complemented with other skills, soft skills, was very important. And now, of course, as you go forward professionally, in fact, even though we have a team of scientists that lead our activities, you end up doing practically all the management and, working with lawyers, working with economists, working with funders, working with policy makers, because you really need to ensure that your technology doesn't get just stuck in the lab, right? That it has to have a pathway forward. So I ended up for the last 20 plus years, very lucky to have found a very like-minded partner in science. I work, alongside Dr. Peter Hotez, who together, we have always been embedded in an academic setting. So we instead of spinning off, our so-called, biotechnology company, even though it's a money-losing guaranteed biotechnology company, because we develop vaccines for many neglected diseases, emerging diseases which are really only urgent when there is a pandemic or an endemic or outbreak. If not, nobody really, prioritizes those diseases until hopefully maybe now in the future. So we've been building this concept of, by working in partnership and enabling what we call decolonization of the transfer of the know-how and the technology, we enable certainly low middle income countries to ultimately be autosufficient and to really be able to not only create their own ideas, but more importantly, how to enable them and how to bring them to the point where, again, they transfer through this critical path set of activities. So we have a school of tropical medicine in Baylor. We have a division of tropical medicine. We, of course, fill all the ecosystem of academic missions, research, education. We also serve the, clinical care. And of course, we do service and advocacy, and we raise awareness, and most importantly, science communication. And our vaccine center, which is an alliance with Texas Children's Hospital, the pediatric hospital here in Houston, we have been moving, again, vaccines from the basic laboratory, creating prototypes that use technology that can be not only replicated, affordable, safe and effective for the low middle income country settings. And that's how 10 years ago we adopted a coronavirus program, because by 2011, pretty much nobody really was paying much attention to the coronaviruses. And we knew that there was a pretty high chance that, similar to SARS and MERS, we were going to see coming back, potentially another outbreak. So we decided to do this similar to our philosophy for neglected diseases. We don't usually patent because that just provides barriers. We always work with an open science mentality, because our technology is intended to be shared transparently with whoever would like to partner and advance for global health purpose. We also, of course, for the coronavirus program, ended up creating a consortium of like-minded partners, and very lucky to now have been working in India with Biological E, one of the most prominent vaccine manufacturers. We now have extended our partnership in Indonesia with Biopharma, in Bangladesh with Incepta, in a group called Immunity Bio, who's building infrastructure in Africa. And as you can see, it's kind of a snowball effect, by using diplomacy, by using partnership, by being open and transparent, we are enabling a lot of these quite, traditional, simple, but really affordable and replicatable and robust technologies that could certainly bring also capacity, strengthen local capacity, and ultimately bring auto-sufficiency to the world. So I'm going to stop and just leave you with a couple of pearls, or 3 or 4 pearls of, what I think are the most important characteristics that you all have to always remember as you're a young woman advancing in the biotechnology field. So first of all, you have to like what you're doing, and therefore that likeness of what you do, that passion, really is what leads you to have curiosity. And curiosity is really what enables you to eventually then gather all the courage that you need for you to be able to don't get discouraged when you fail, or when somebody says no to you, or when you have a struggle, scientific or professionally or personally. So curiosity and courage. But then for you to really enable what you do, you have to collaborate and communicate, right? Don't ever forget that you have to really communicate, and this ability of translating science, it's very important. But the last piece, which I think it's probably what I learned that it was the most helpful for me, is cultural intelligence, especially when you're working in teams, when you're working with partners, when you're working with the world. You have to listen and learn and share not only your cultural experiences, but also pay attention to the cultural experiences with whom you're working with. So I wish you all the best, and look forward to the Q&A. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your insightful speech and giving us your valuable time despite of having such a busy schedule. We are really grateful you're here today. Thank you so much. I hope you really have an amazing day ahead.
So the Q&A session will start. So before the question starts rolling in, I have a question for both of you. Is that sometimes things don't seem to work out. And there are times when things do not work out as you plan. So I'm sure both of you have experienced it, and I wanted to know, how did you pull yourself up from it?
I go first. When you are starting a company, there are a lot of things that can go wrong, right? And even as you're pursuing a PhD thesis, right? How many failed experiments before you get to the end? I think for me, what I always tell people is, if you don't ask, the answer is always going to be no, right? So if you're afraid to do something and you're too timid to ask that question, you're flat out at a no to start with. So why not ask? Maybe it'll be a yes, maybe it'll be a maybe. Well, you'll have to see. But for me, I think you have to just look at everything as a learning opportunity. Very recently I was asked, you're putting yourself out there, you're doing some very, very cutting edge things. Aren't you afraid of failing? And I think it's natural. Everybody has sort of a fear of, what if I don't get to the next step? But I think it's all in kind of how you frame the mindset, and the perspective that you're looking at. So I think, everything that I'm doing is paving the way for somebody else. It's like laying bricks on a patio. Every step forward I make, that's 2 steps forward for the next person. And everybody's sort of building on that momentum. So even if you don't finish, you're making a mark for everybody else. And just by being a role model, and putting yourself out there, I think that gives an opportunity for somebody else to look out there and say, what, I can do that too. So for me, I think that has gotten me over a lot of the hurdles. But don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to try. Don't be afraid to fail. Failure is part of the game, and don't think of it as failure. Think of it as sort of moving away, learning, and sort of laying the framework for the next person.
Thank you, Dr. Wagner. I think that would be very useful. And now, Dr. Bottazz, sorry to cut you off. Please,
No, sure, that's fine. I totally agree, right? So what we need to learn to be uncomfortable, right? Because being uncomfortable is what really pushes us to be the trailblazers, right? If you always do something that it's like kind of like the same old. I mean, you always have to reinvent yourself, and I think that's why, especially we women, especially women in science, we have that ability of adaptability, right, and flexibility. And I think that's the key, right? Is to learn from being uncomfortable how to really be trailblazers. And again, it's like like Nicole said, I mean, you have to ask, you have to, we know that we cannot do things by ourselves, and not get discouraged when you, of course, you have doors closed, or, that people don't respond to you. But I think that's really what, requires you to, be resilient, right, at doing what we do. And absolutely, right. I think that's, as Nicole said, even as ourselves, when we were developing vaccines, for these neglected diseases, we wanted to make sure we paid attention to all others that have been trying this field before, and tried to avoid those mistakes. So the same way how we learn from others' mistakes, our own mistakes will teach somebody else, right? And there's never bad data out there, right? Even negative data or failures, especially in the sciences, it's a learning for somebody else, right? There's never bad science, because usually whether an experiment works or doesn't work, that certainly ensures that somebody else understands what should be the new hypothesis, or how to advance to new discoveries. Back to you.
Okay, thank you so much for your answer. I think it's very inspiring and relatable. Rabia, I think you have a question, right?
Yeah, I have a question to both of you. In your opinion, which changes are needed in the scientific system to be more attractive to women in science and possible future scientists?
You broke up a little bit at the beginning. Can you repeat it, please?
In your opinion, which changes are needed in the scientific system to be more attractive to women in science and possible future scientists?
So what changes? Maybe I'll start, Nicole, if you don't mind. Well, I think changes in general, probably more sustainability in the sense that, there are opportunities not only for funding, but recognition that, science and research, really enable, at the end of the day, even security and progress, and certainly, the world to become a better world, right? So I think that, but for women specifically, I think that what we should do is raise more our voices, so that we can, continue being considered, of course, accountable, at the same time pair, like with any other, right? So I think that we should have more opportunities to be able to participate and be centered, around the tables, to be able to contribute. So I think that that's what we need to do, and more we need to therefore, kind of raise our voices and be able to contribute equally.
I think for me, it's seeing more people be the trailblazers. Seeing more women out there. I often get asked, who was that role model, or did you imagine that you were going to be the person in space, or what? How did you get to where you're going? And some paths, I can clearly define who that person was, and then there are other ones where you sort of need to go out there on your own. And so, when I think about it, right? So I have 3 children. I have a 6-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 5-month-old. And my daughter, she, every time she sees a plane in the sky, she's like, "Mom, that's your rocket." And it's not my rocket, but she's learning from me, because she hears me talking about things like that. And so it's showing her that something like that is attainable. Or she went to school the other day, and she was in kindergarten. This was last year. And she said, "Mom, how parents are very proud of their kids?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Well, today you're going to be really proud of me." And I said, "Okay." She said, "Well, today I helped NASA." And so what she did is she built a Lego rocket, covered it in tinfoil, so that NASA could do deep space missions. So I think the more we champion other people, and the more we champion women, and sort of build, to Maria's point, sustainability, showing that there's a path forward. I think that opens up a lot of opportunities, just to know that you can do it, that there is a path out there, and the path may not be linear, as we've both described, but there is some path to moving forward.
Okay, thank you so much for your answers. I think I have a question. It's a little more specific. So I'd like to ask both of you guys, which quality do you think is more important in this day and age of technology? Do you think that dry lab experience is important, or do you think that wet lab experience is important? Or do you think that a 50-50 in both of these is important for us young scientists? What do both of you think about this?
So I would say practical experience, right? So, I think there's so much that you can learn from a book, right? And you read about it and you have a very passive understanding. I think a lot of a person's true understanding comes from trying and failing. So, trying an experiment, being a little bit unsure how to do it, and maybe making a mistake, but learning then next time, don't add this much reagent, or try it a little bit differently. The same thing with presenting, right? So if you're afraid to do a presentation, do more of them. The first one you're going to be nervous and you're going to be hesitant to do it, but the more comfortable you get, the better you get at it. And so I think some of it is just getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, and learning as you move forward. One of the things that I often say or hear people say is like, "Oh my gosh, my life is so hard," right? I must be doing something wrong because life is so hard. No, you're doing something right. Life is hard, and you're learning, and that uncertainty and uncomfortableness is what's allowing you to really move forward. So I I think there's an importance in learning, formal education, and going through the formalities, and the books, and doing practical things in the lab. But I think the best experience that you'll get is to try something, fail. Learning on the job practical training is probably going to be the most beneficial for you.
So from my side, I agree. And I would argue that, again, it's that balance of the hard skills and the soft skills. Because, you still need to interact with people, right? We don't work anymore in isolation. So it's clearly, it's the fact that we need to work, in teams. So you have to be able to master that ability of interacting and really understanding how, like the same, right? How we were talking about, professional, personal, and even self-care, right? You have to be able to navigate through all of that. So I think that the key is to be able to master a little bit of, the balance of, the hard skill with the soft skill. And then, as I mentioned, I think more and more we're seeing that even though we want to avoid, of course, not necessarily being a jack of all trades, right? Then you dilute your expertise too much, but now you need to be able to be more conversant in multiple disciplines, right? That even though you may be specialized in a very specific line of biotechnology, you have to be able to interact and understand when you work with people that are from other disciplines. So I think that's also very important. And I'm looking for a paper that I'm going to be putting on the chat in a moment when I find the link, so that you can see this concept of transformational leadership, right? That really, ensures that you keep those, there's a few traits that you can use to build, to complement, of course, the hard skills.
Thank you so much. I would like to know more about how did you learn to communicate in the business world? How was it like? And what was it like when you were building your leadership skills?
So maybe I can start a little bit. So first of all, I think that has been probably one of the hardest pieces that I had to learn. I'm, even though maybe you would think that I am an extrovert, sometimes I'm really not. And it was not very easy, to come up with the how do you speak, and how do you speak not only in front of a large audiences, but also when do you want to speak to people that are not in your scientific field? Because as you grow and you learn more and more, you become more comfortable when you're speaking amongst ourselves, right, amongst us scientists, because of course you learn the very specialized language, and then you have your relatively very cookie cutter presentations, you use PowerPoint, right? And then all of a sudden you realize that that's not enough, right? That you have to even go beyond just speaking in a normal, conventional scientific conference, that you have to learn those skills. And it's not easy, right? And then, of course, I'm a different generation than you guys. And so I did not grow up with all the social media options that you all have now. And I have to say that it's been not easy to figure out, how to do Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and all sorts of gazillion things that you have now that, it's hard to keep track with just an email, to be able to do that. So I relied on my mentors, and that were also growing and learning as we went, to the societies. So I found that, at least in my world, the American Society of Microbiology, the American Society of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene were essential. The one that has helped the most is the American Association for Advancement of Science, AAAS. AAAS has been key for me because one, they do this for all the sciences, right? Not just for the medical or biomedical, all the sciences. Two, they actually have very specific programs that really and some of them are even for free, for you to learn what does communication really mean. And that's where I ended up, being very fortunate that I was selected to be one of the members of a training program. It's called the Leshner Fellows for, indeed, science, communication, and engagement. And they really gave me a lot of tools, how to engage with journalists, how to engage with policymakers, how to handle all the new social media, platforms, how to write op-eds, how to, do blogs, so there's so many different ways of doing this. And then I think, again, it's really test and trial, right? That you learn. And then the other groups that I found very useful for me are the academies of sciences, technology, engineering, medicine, you name it, right? There are all sorts of academies, wherever you are. There must be groups that are, that are like-minded individuals that bring a lot of expertise, but they work together to in an agnostic way, let's say it, right, with no bias, right, that offer the scientific or the underpinning evidence of when you want to describe or advance a topic. So I think that those are the groups that I found mostly useful for me.
For me, I think so it's hard learning things outside of your field. And for me, thankfully, when I was transitioning from pure lab science to trying to run the business, we didn't have as much Zoom, because on my first business call, when they were asking me all those questions, my face was so red. I was so embarrassed. I had no idea what I was talking. I was very, very nervous. And, fast forward, some of it is just practice. The more you do it, the better you become. I'm sitting here on my end, and I'm watching everybody in this panel, and this is, coming out of your comfort zone to lead a panel, to get exposure, to practice, an opportunity to learn from others. The other thing that's often missed is we always talk about how we communicate outward. There's so much about listening. When I interview for a job, some of the things that I want to hear somebody say first to me in terms of skills, like, what could you bring? I'm a good listener. That's so important. It doesn't mean you have to take everybody's advice, but it means that you have the ability to hear what they're saying, come back, think about it, internalize it, and then decide how you're going to move forward. The more people you talk to, the more opinions you're going to get, and the more you're either going to have a particular opinion reinforced. So you're going to, if you ask 3 people, what should I do? And 2 say this and 1 say something different, maybe there's a reason why those 2 said the same thing. So I think some of it is practice. The more you do it, the better you're going to become at it. Listen to other people who have done it before and learn as much as you possibly can. And the other part, like to Maria's point, it's hard to learn all the languages of all these different social media platforms. And even for me, kind of growing up into it, I'm like, how do I tweet this? What am I hashtagging? I'm still learning the different ways of communicating. So I think, I've asked people, just ask questions, ask for help, put yourself out there, because again, if you don't ask, the answer is no.
Thank you so much for your answers. So we would end with the final question from the audience. Okay. So Shama Priya asks, give me an example of a time you had to think out of the box to reach a solution.
Well, from my side, I have to unfortunately tell you that we have to think out of the box all the time, because when we work in a field where one, there's a lot of competition, because there's so many diseases around the world, and many of them would benefit from developing vaccines against them, right, or to prevent them, and probably there's never enough money or interest from all the different stakeholders, right? Scientific stakeholders, financial stakeholders, even the countries, or even the people, right? We've been hearing how, you have to also be very much attuned to the demand and the confidence and hesitance of people nowadays, especially for biotechnology, biomedical solutions. So we always have to figure out how to present our information in a way that it's always highlighting, innovative ways of how to reach those stakeholders. And then, of course, scientifically, scientifically, we value a lot of innovation, but we need to make sure that those innovations have their traditional way of navigating. Like, I know, for example, let me give you an example. So we know we've had some wonderful new technologies that very luckily we've been fortunate to see that they ended up working for the coronavirus, which of course are RNA technology, some viral vector technologies for the vaccines. And those are amazing, but everybody's waiting to see how they become mainstream. But for that to happen, it does require a lot of work and a lot of investment for them to be really adopted as a mainstream technology, right? So in the meantime, we work, of course, in the most not traditional technologies that maybe, again, they're not so innovative because they're, of course, been mainstream for the last 50 years. We have to figure out a way, how can we complement, and how can we, certainly in the background of an emergency, don't look like it's a competition, right? That we're actually here to all contribute in a way that we can come and bring a solution to the table. And I think probably was one of the hardest things, right? Is how to reinvent the way that you not only do your research, but also how, again, going back to how do you present, how do you do your pitch so that people can really see the value of you bringing a solution to the table and what the solution really, what is it for and what it will do. And see then how do you engage into certainly accessing at all stages of what you need, right? The scientific partnerships, certainly the financial partnerships. But then I think for us from the beginning was how do we therefore ensure that people are aware of what we're doing so that then they can be accepted technologies, which we've seen that it's been a big challenge, in these days, right? To have people accept and not be afraid or hesitant of something that will bring a value and certainly a health value.
Yeah, I think by nature of being a scientist and a researcher, you're constantly thinking outside of the box. I always tell the people who work with me or for me, it's hard, and if we already knew the answer, we would already be doing it, right? So that's why when you're in the lab and you're making these mistakes and you're having these failures, that's okay, because if I expected you to know the answer, we wouldn't be doing this, and people would already have artificial retinas. So part of that is constantly thinking out of the box. One thing that comes to mind, and a lot of people would probably relate, is how do manufacturing on the International Space Station is certainly very novel, and is a unique way to solve a challenge that we were currently having, and how we did the manufacturing terrestrially. So I think that has been one way that we've leveraged and took some unique opportunities, to look at ways that we can improve how we're manufacturing our technology. And anything that we're doing on the International Space Station has been very much out of the box thinking. So just to give a snapshot, I mean, we've manufactured this, and the apparatus that we use takes up the entire size of it's basically the size of a hood, that you would have in your laboratory. And we've had to get that down to about 1 foot, in terms of a footprint. So how do you miniaturize it? How do you change an open beaker system to a flow through type system? How do you reduce, how do you automate that process completely? How do you think about sterility in a different way? How do you communicate so I'm more on the biology side. How do I communicate with the engineers what's really important? And then how do you make a business case for something like this? All of those different pieces, we're constantly thinking about, and those are just some ways that we've had to think outside of the box. Now, how do you solve those problems? Again, it's putting yourself out there and talking to as many people as possible. Ask questions, go to seminars. One of the questions is, what opportunities are available. Attend every seminar that you can. Go to as many, attend as many, especially now where things are virtual. There's a lot more opportunities to get these knowledges, and learn things without actually having to travel all over the place. So just learn from those who have done it before, learn from their mistakes, ask questions, and find a great mentor. A mentor-mentee relationship is really important. And so some of the people that I've mentored, I want to see them succeed probably more than they do. I've seen something in them that I know that they can be great. And so I want to push them and challenge their way of thinking. If they're like, Nicole, I want to do this. I'm like, well, yeah, but I know you can do that. So let's think even a little bit bigger. And so having those people to sort of push you when you hit that roadblock, I think is really important. And so I've been fortunate to have some amazing mentors, and I would encourage, if you don't have a mentor, to find one. And it's organic. It's not like I can just go look on a list of people and find who I want to be my mentor. But the more people you talk with, you'll find somebody, and you'll have a chemistry with that person, and you'll know instantly that you want to work with this person. And this person says, you know what, I think you are awesome. How do we go to that next level? How do we take that technology that you're doing and bring it forward? How do we get you that publication? How do you get that next job? Let's just keep pushing you. So it's your cheerleader, it's your champion. And so everybody should find someone like that if they don't have that person. And I guarantee that for me was what really helped keep me going. And then the one other thing that I will add is that when you're a CEO and an entrepreneur, it can be long days and they can feel very, very lonely. And there's a lot of failures and there's a lot of challenges. For me, the other piece that keeps me going is sort of the mission of what we're doing. So the technology that we're building is to try to help people that are blinded by these end-stage retinal degenerative diseases. And so when we have patients, our potential patients, at some, they'll come up and they'll say, "My mother has this disease. My grandmother has this disease." That at the end of the day it sort of revitalizes your energy and say, you know what, there is a need for what I'm doing. There is what I'm doing is fulfilling my own personal mission to help people succeed.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wagner and Dr. Bottazz, for your time. I'm afraid that we have come to the end of our session, and I'm sure everyone here is living inspired and energized to take on the world and make their dreams come true. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so